Might come up with you. There we go. Well, hello, everyone. This is Chrystal Lynn, Cowgirl Astrologer, and I am super excited tonight to come to you guys and talk about something that we've all been highly affected by, and that is the death of Prince. You know, I really hesitated in coming out too soon to talk about it, but I know that so many people are grieving and so many people are really looking around going, what is going on right now with these amazing creative souls? And so I have enlisted somebody very special tonight, April, our Moon in Pisces goddess. She's one of my astro buddies here on YouTube. She will be joining me because she has a very strong connection and love for just the work and the music that Prince has left behind. And so I want to introduce April. April, how are you tonight?
Hi, I'm doing good. I'm feeling this Pisces moon energy. Hey.
Well, that's the other really cool thing about tonight is the moon is in Pisces. And April and I both have the moon in Pisces. And as we talk about Prince, he also had the moon in Pisces. So we felt like tonight, even though it is still very raw and emotional, we just wanted to come and share some insights tonight. And also for those of you guys out there, we'd love to hear your observations or comments or anything you'd like to add to this. There's no way that we can talk about every astrological aspect, but we're just going to talk about some interesting things tonight about the legendary Prince. So how are you doing over there? This was a pretty big shock for you.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've been a really, really big fan since I was little. I was raised on his music, you know, not just, I mean, Purple Rain was like my generation's album, but, you know, my parents are very Piscean people, Neptunian people, so I was just raised on music, even his earlier albums. And just when Purple Rain came out, you know, I was a little girl, but I remember seeing it everywhere, hearing it everywhere, and I wanted to listen to it. I wanted to read the back of the album cover, and my parents would snatch it away. You know, I'd want to watch it. I'd find any excuse to go downstairs and watch it on HBO and sneak down in my jammies and, you know, try to watch it. And my parents say, go to bed. And I'm like, but it's Prince. I really want to see him. So, I mean, it started from there. I don't want to go on and on about myself, but, you know, just, yeah. So basically as a lifelong fan, it's still a shock and still kind of emotional, but I'm ready to talk about it.
I thank you so much for joining me tonight on this, because I was feeling the same way. And I just thought, when we follow each other on Facebook, so I saw your post and I'm like, and then what was really interesting is I was looking at your chart tonight just a little bit, and this is for those of you out there, just something to think about. You know, often we're highly attracted to certain music, or we're highly attracted to certain actors or actresses that we just have this draw to. And when I look at your chart, you share so much, you know, so many aspects that Prince, he was a Scorpio rising with the moon in Pisces, as you are.
Right.
Venus in Taurus and Jupiter in Libra, as you do.
Yeah.
Those were just a few things. So he spoke to you. He spoke not only to your generation, but when I can identify with an artist that writes and speaks, they're like speaking our language. And so myself as a moon in Pisces, I can identify with his lyrics, with how he, you know, his colors even. I mean, Purple Rain, you know, is so Pisces, you know, it's like purple,
yes,
blues. And so just to bring out, I'm sure a lot of you guys out there who follow astrology have already come to that conclusion, but don't you think that we can have really intense connections with people, not always know why?
Yes, I strongly agree. It's like you took the words right out of my mouth. I have noticed that not just me, but like other people, when they're drawn to certain, you know, artists, certain, I mean, even actors are artists, you know, so just anybody who puts any type of art out there, puts themselves into their work, to their art, and then shares it with us, you know, it's like we are vibrating on the same type of wavelength or tune into the same channel as they are. And, you know, people who aren't into astrology, they don't really see that, but it's like they just feel connections with these people, as you said. And then if they actually, you know, look into the astrology of that artist and then themselves, it's like, wow, we're just, you know, your chart is just made of energy. It's just like mapping out the energy of you and your personality. And so it's like, you know, their work that they do does speak to you in a way. Like you said, you know, his language, like Pisces moons, especially Piscean people, you know, we speak a special language that doesn't always make sense to everyone else. You know, it's like poetry mixed with all kinds of stuff, and like, but we get it, you know, just like all of Prince's lyrics, like people would say that they were like, you know, pretty out there, but it's like we don't even have to sit there and try to pick apart and decode what he's saying. Like we know what he's talking about. So yeah, that's just an example. Like we really do relate and connect with artists. And I think that's also why, you know, a lot of us, when certain artists pass away, like we do feel like a part of us left, or it's somebody that we knew. And then you'll see all over social media, people will try to, you know, chop you down and say, well, you didn't even know that person personally. How could you miss them? How can you be sad? It's not like you knew them. But really, especially if we share some of the same like energies as they do, or quote unquote signs, or, you know, whatever, it is like we do know them, you know, and like we are vibrating on the same channel.
Well,
So
and
it's like we love.
yeah, it's amazing because their music often plays in the background of our storylines. So we're having these memories, we're having these connections, and this music is, you know, we're connecting to that music at that same time. That's why music is so powerful when you're driving down the road and you listen to a song and it can take you back to a very specific memory. It's like you're solidifying that memory with that song. And so, you know, we don't realize how deeply we truly are connecting. And especially the artists, and we'll talk about this a little tonight too, but with Moon in Pisces, or a strong Pisces, you know, signature, you know, they speak for all the collective. They speak words that we don't even know how to, you know, they tap into an energy that brings out such deep emotion in us. They know how to go down deep and really draw that emotional stuff out. So I think it's very powerful when we see a legend like this and how everyone is reacting, because he was such a creative genius. But he, you know, he had that Moon in Pisces soul that spoke to, you know, not only our intellect with his sun and Mercury and Gemini, but our true soul, that spiritual side. He brought us there. And so you're affected by that. When somebody can help usher you in to an emotion that you may not normally know how to experience yourself. So I don't know if that sounds all Pisces right now, but that's about it. You get it, right?
Yes, I get it. I get it totally. And I agree.
So, so why don't we just get started? We're going to look at his chart tonight a little bit and talk about some things. I find it very interesting, you know, that he did have this ascendant in Scorpio and Moon in Pisces, two strong water signs. What do you think about that?
Yes. What, and then his moon is I mean, and before any fellow astro nerds start correcting me, I use whole sign and regular Placidus system. I know that doesn't make sense to probably normal Prince fans if they watch this, but astro nerds know what I'm talking about. I use both, okay? But his moon was in the 4th house of his chart, and so that makes him very, very super uber sensitive, because that's a water sign house. So he's like not only a Pisces moon, but like a Cancer moon too. So very, very attached to his roots, I noticed, because of the moon being in the 4th house. Like the roots meaning, you know, his people, his culture. He always stood up for the rights of his people. And then the 4th house, it represents, you know, your home, your family, your roots, where you come from. He stayed in Minnesota pretty much his whole life. I know he had a home in Spain, a home in Paris, home there, but he built Paisley Park, I believe in the 80s or 90s, and it was like, it's like his own little sanctuary. It's a studio. It's like a music recording studio. He shot music videos there. He had a club. He did dance parties. It was like everything, his home, everything. And you know, so that's his hometown. That's where he was born, and he decided to stay there. He even said in an early interview, "I'll always live in Minnesota." You know, sticks to his roots. That's where he feels comfortable. And because he's a Pisces moons, we love to be in our own world, just floating around without worrying about time, you know, or anything like that. And that's exactly the way that he lived. He always said, when people say, "What keeps you so young?" You know, and I mean, he is a boyish, you know, Gemini, like youthful Gemini, but also because he's a Pisces moon, and you know, Pisces moon, we would rather not give a crap about time and watch clocks and things like that, you know, because it disturbs like our purpose here, you know, like, which is just to go with the flow of things and channel, you know, channel energy to be able to create undisturbed. And so that's how he lived. He didn't really have clocks around, pay attention to time, you know, at Paisley Park and things like that. So he just had the freedom to just create at all hours, at any time, and really just live out his sole purpose, you know, without worrying about the constraints of time, which I think is really awesome. And you know, he's not only has his rising sign or ascendant in Scorpio, but he also has Neptune in Scorpio and the North Node in Scorpio. So, and they're in conjunction with each other. So like part of his soul's purpose was connected to Neptune, which rules the sign of Pisces. So he's like uber Neptunian. You know, his purpose was to be here to just give great, you know, art to the world and share it with everyone with compassion and love. And there's just so much to say.
I know. You know, I thought it was really interesting. Because one of the studies I've been working on as well is just the life of Michael Jackson. I've actually done a celebrity chart a few years ago. I almost need to update it because I've just gained so much more insight into astrology. But it's interesting that Michael Jackson, you know, he had, you know, Neverland, that sanctuary. He also was a moon in Pisces, but he was a Pisces rising. So when you look at his little place of isolation that he created, you see the animals and the Pisces whole, you know, energy there. You see him opening up to children, you know, which got him in trouble. We won't go into that right now, but I truly believe that he had a true heart, and he, you know, it is that young spirit, and so can be taken in a lot of different ways in our day and age, but it is that raw, young, youthful nature. But here with Prince, with his Scorpio rising, you know, Paisley Park was a totally different type of, you know, outer persona, representing more of that lockdown privacy. But they both created their own little worlds. And there's that moon in Pisces. But if you look at the Scorpio rising versus the Pisces rising, I think you really see it in the outer, you know, the outer look of their homes. I don't know. I just thought that was really interesting. And I think with his Sun and Mercury in Gemini, that also lends to him having that need for his community, staying in that place, that hometown place where you were born, you know, caring about your people. You know, that also has a lot of that Mercury feel to it. So I don't know. I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. It is. Yeah, that is a very interesting comparison. And both of them were like tremendously great artists that had such a huge impact, and they really do have a lot in common. as far as their energies and everything, but we could probably go on for hours about that.
And they were only born a couple months apart. So they were born the same year, and they really have a lot of the same, you know, as far as generational planets. They were born, I mean, even Madonna was born in that little time period. So a lot of famous, you know, singers came out of that year. And we're seeing a lot of them now in the, you know, in the forefront. The other thing I thought was really interesting is in one of the interviews I was listening to is that he really truly wanted to be a basketball player. And he was really upset, you know, that he was kind of, you know, he was small and he got teased when he was young. And I'm looking at the fact that he has Mars and Aries. And that just makes so much sense to me. You know, it's that athlete, that competitor, you know. And even when they, you know, you listen to the people that he worked with, they said he was just always outworked everybody. He was always the best. He played every instrument better, you know, and I just see that Mars and Aries energy, even though it's on the cusp of, you know, of Mars and Pisces, Mars and Aries at 31 degrees approximately, you still see that competitive energy coming through. So I think, you know, he definitely was an athlete, you know, that I don't think he could fully express, but he did express it in his music. So
yeah, I saw and heard all those, you know, stories about him wanting to be an athlete, but I heard that he could like really just like shoot baskets like nothing, like make the shots like nothing. And then of course there's the Dave Chappelle thing where he acted out the story of him beating him in basketball, which is hilarious. And another thing about Prince that, you know, people didn't really publicly get to see a certain side to him was that everybody's coming out and telling more stories about is his sense of humor, that he was such a funny guy. I mean, one of his friends even described him as being on the same level as some of the most like top comedians, like as far as his sense of humor and everything. And I believe that comes from, you know, number one, having Mercury and the Sun in Gemini. Gemini is the trickster, the playful, the jokester, you know, but also he has, you know, some sixth house energy. I mean, his Venus is in the sixth house. And I always find that sixth house and Virgo energy people, that they tend to really, really appreciate comedy and just laughing and cracking jokes, you know. So yeah, he was like a really funny guy, a lot of people said, but it's like, I think it's one of those things, he was kind of maybe afraid to show that in public, or he just kind of kept that between him and his like immediate circle of people. But yeah, and he actually really loved a lot of memes like that were circling around the internet of him, and shared some of them on his own Instagram. And the Charlie Murphy get up of him, you know, as I mean, Dave Chappelle dresses him with the plate of pancakes. He actually put it on the cover of one of his singles called Breakfast Can Wait. So he really appreciated comedy, and that made me, like, knowing that made me fall even more in love with it.
yeah. Well, and I think, you know, I think it's very common, you know, when you see the Scorpio rising or the moon in Pisces, that they really are more comfortable in those more private relationships and private settings where they come out. You know, when you have the Sun in Gemini, you know, his mind was going 100 miles an hour. But he really did, you know, protect himself. I mean, he really tried to protect. And I think, you know, people asked him if he was shy. I think there definitely was a shy side, but I love that, like you said, that, you know, they know how to mimic. That's very Mercurian. So yeah, I think that's really interesting too. You know, the other thing I was looking at is that he, as we speak, was experiencing his Saturn return, like within a few degrees. Saturn in Sagittarius is retrograde right now, and let me look at kind of where we're at. It was just within a few degrees at 15 degrees, and he was born with Saturn in Sagittarius retrograde at 22 degrees. So, you know, a lot of people, when we talk about Saturn, and it's not to scare anyone, but to realize that, you know, this is a time when there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot going on. this was also conjunct with his second house of values and who he was and all of the things that he was personally experiencing, you know, to allow a celebrity to be human, which astrology allows us to do. He was really going through a lot of changes, opposing the Sun and Mercury in his chart. Saturn is opposing the 8th house. So these are things, just for those of you out there who are kind of looking at when we are going through intense time, when we often feel alone. Saturn can have us feel alone. And I really thought it was interesting. I don't know what you think, but how is it that he was alone, you know, the day that he passed away? How was it that he was alone? Where is his staff? Where is his security? Like, how is he alone in this huge place? I mean, that just didn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, I feel that, you know, even though he was still pretty young and we all hated to see him go, and a lot of people were saying, well, he did, you know, he didn't seem like he was that sick, or, you know, like to be able to just pass or whatever. Like just didn't seem like his time. That's what a lot of people say. You know, as hard as it is to even think about this or say it or anything, and it's not very easy to understand right now either, especially because it's still so new to everybody. But I mean, divine timing does show us, you know, when it's just time for certain things. And so, I mean, like I said, it's really hard to say this, but it was his time. I mean, he may not have, he hated time, so he probably, you know, but I think also that he had a sense, because he's so intuitive, such an intuitive person, with all this water in his chart, Neptune, Pluto, all this stuff in his chart, that I think he felt, you know, that his time was near. Whether that be because maybe he did have a hidden health issue, and that's very possible with him having Uranus transiting through his 6th house of health, and that can bring a sudden health issue to the surface, and many other, you know, transits that I don't want to get into to point out, you know, passing, but I think maybe he intuitively kind of felt it coming on, but maybe because he's such a youthful Gemini and he's such a hard worker and everything, he was trying to fight against it a little bit, but at the same time go along with it by doing things like putting on a $10 entry fee concert, you know, to give back to fans, and you know, little things like that he did before he passed. And, you know, starting to write his memoirs, even though he's a very private person, and just a lot of things kind of point to his time was near. I hate to say that, oh my gosh, but then the fact that the day that he passed, I think that evening was the full moon in Scorpio, or the next day. It's hard for me to remember right now, but the full moon in Scorpio, it was full at 2 degrees Scorpio, and his Neptune is 2 degrees Scorpio, and then his North Node is 0 degrees Scorpio. So that's like a point of transition, or, you know, it was a significant point in his chart that full moon hit. So, you know, that and other things that I don't want to point out just kind of showed us astrologically too that, you know, it was time for him to go. And a lot of people are really upset at the fact that, you know, he was cremated right away. There wasn't like a big huge deal, services and all this stuff publicly, you know, and oh, where's his will? That's what the talk is at the moment, you know, what happened to him and all these things, like basically what happened to him. I believe that because he's such a Neptunian person, and Neptune, you know, dissolves the boundaries between the physical and the spiritual realm. I think even as protective as he was over his material world here on Earth, all in all, in the end, he knew, you know, especially with all of that Neptune in 12th house energy, that there's so much more than just this physical realm. And so even if he left it behind, like it it didn't really matter as much to him as being able to give out pure divine love to the world, you know. So with that being said, I think that's why, you know, it was his time. It was and you know, he didn't care as much about the material world as it appeared that he did.
Yeah.
So that's why it was just like his wishes were to just have his final, you know, plans go very fast so that people cannot dwell on the physical, because he wouldn't want us to, because he didn't do that, you know. So that's all I have to say about that.
Yes. I wanted to say too, I should clarify, because I'm, you know, we can always look in hindsight after somebody passes, and I'm not, you know, suggesting in astrology, but, you know, my personal belief is that even if I could predict, I would not want to predict future situations in somebody passing. Although, you know, some people, we can see in astrology that there's very specific, like you said, divine moments, and they play out differently. There's no way for us to predict, because there's free will, and there's, you know, so many things that, you know, direct our course. But when we look at where he was at, we can see that he was going through literally the peak of his Saturn return. I thought it was interesting that, you know, they talked a lot about him having a lot of hip problems, which may have been what lended to him, you know, getting caught up in pain medications, such as Michael Jackson did, because, you know, they're out there, they're athletes, I mean, what they do with their bodies is unbelievable. And so these are cycles that real people deal with. That's why we're talking about this, to bring about that he was a real person. Saturn in Sagittarius, that rules the hips. The day that Saturn moved into Sagittarius last year in September, my mother fell and broke her hip. You know, people are having these issues right now, these physical issues of our bodies, our hips, also with this Neptune and Pisces fueling the energy in the background. Those of us who do have strong water signs are really struggling on this earth because of the high vibration that we're having to try to deal with. So it is super easy to get caught up in self-medicating and trying to do something to die the energy down. And then, as we know, you know, these things get, you know, out of control. And but I want to say, I understand, I see it, and not in judgment of him or of anybody. These are things that we all have to kind of look at. And him being such a creative genius, so spiritually inclined, and the water energy in his chart, you know, I mean, I can see just in his chart where he was dealing with a lot of internal issues, you know. So, you know, we can see that. We can see it.
Yeah.
What else do we want to talk about here? He had his MC in Leo, so that makes sense. That that energy, that although he was a Scorpio rising, that he was brought out to the forefront, that he was brought out on stage, that he had that, you know, that Leo energy. Also had Pluto conjunct his midheaven, which is the MC, or the midheaven is, you know, in astrology, how our careers can be expressed, what type of energy comes through when everything works together. How does it come out? And obviously here he had a star for sure. Leo is ruled by the sun, and it's just, you know, that larger than life persona, that larger than life, when you see somebody like this, that magnetism, you know, was there. So that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And he had a Uranus in Leo, and you know, Leo rules his midheaven, the point of career and social, you know, image and everything. And even though it was in the ninth house, it's still in the same sign as his midheaven. So I believe that it plays a part in his career. And I mean, his whole career, if you know the energies of Uranus, what Uranus represents, and then Pluto, it's like it makes total sense. Like Pluto is, okay, yeah, sexuality, like raw, you know, and power and transformation. And then there's Uranus, which is like being totally outside of the box. I mean, come on, the guy wore like women's clothes and makeup, and he did all this like stuff that people were like, oh my God, he's so weird. And then you hear in interviews, it would kind of irritate me for him because I could totally feel the irritation when they're like, what do you think about people saying you're weird, Prince? I'm just like, I'm sure he wanted to do a Gemini eye roll, like, oh my God, really? But he played it off cool. But it's just, you know, weird. Okay, yeah. But, you know, he was just very, very different. Because he was a Gemini also, there's two sides to Gemini, you know, and he was very in touch with his masculine and feminine side. And what I find very interesting also is that plays out in his music. If you really actually listen to his music, he can go to a very deep, low, like baritone tone in his singing, but also he can do falsetto, you know. So he was very in touch with the male and female. I attribute that also because he has Mercury in the same sign as the 8th house, and so that would make a voice very deep and sensual, you know. But also he has Venus in Taurus. Taurus rules the voice, and Venus is in the 6th house of his chart. And the 6th house, you know, since it corresponds with Virgo, the Virgin, I always find a lot of singers who can do falsetto, they either have like planets in the 6th house or in Virgo itself, because, you know, that's like the prepubescent girl is what, you know, the symbol that represents Virgo. So they can go that high tone, that high pitch, you know. So it just definitely showed he was in touch with feminine and masculine. And that's not always cool to people, but he was just like, I don't care, you know, and he just did his rebellious thing. So that Uranus played out so like well in his career. And I think that's why so many people are drawn to him too. Like, you know, I'm drawn to him, and I feel like I learn a lot from him just being himself, pardon me. And I was like, are you going to correct me? I know you're a Virgo. I know it's not his sign. But
No,
anyway,
I'm in Pisces mode right now. I'm flowing with it.
Yeah. So
Yeah, and it, you know, it's interesting, and again, just to do a brief comparison again, but just because you know, him and Michael Jackson, you know, they had that ability to become the music, which I think is so Moon and Pisces, just become the beat. But because he had a Scorpio rising, because Prince had a Scorpio rising, he had, you know, he brought in that sexual tone, that freedom, you know, where there was no boundaries when it comes to that. You know, back when he was getting really popular, you know, MTV was his greatest platform. They loved him because, you know, he was just so dynamic. But at the same time, you know, all the parents were getting mad because he was breaking those boundaries of sexual freedom. Where when we see Michael Jackson with the Pisces rising, he was out there saving the world, you know, saving the kids, saving the, you know, the different countries. He had a different mission of his music. But again, you know, I just think that that Scorpio rising in him definitely gave him that energy to say, I'm coming through. I'm going to do this, you know. And I think he opened a lot of doors. I mean, he did things that nobody was doing at that time. With his North Node on his ascendant, that really shows as well that was, you know, that passion that he had to be completely free. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. One thing I've been wondering, I mean, I know he's, you know, became very religious later on, but I am just like so curious if he was into astrology. I am so curious, of course, me being like obsessed with astrology. I know that there's an interview that he did on MTV like in the late 90s, I believe, and he was wearing a jacket that had the Gemini symbol on the front, and it had his you know, his symbol for his name or whatever on the back. And I'm like, oh my God, I freaked out. Like, oh, Prince, he was probably into astrology. I'm not sure if he was. He has mentioned the Gemini thing a few times. But one thing that I know that he was into was the chakras. And I read an interview that was in the most, like, recently, like 2 years ago from him, where he explained to the interviewer some things about the chakras. And I just went crazy over that. Like, oh my gosh, I've always wondered if he was aware of those things because of the fact that his favorite color is purple. And people say, oh, well, it's because it's the color of royalty and his name's Prince. I have a different theory on that. I think maybe, okay, consciously, yeah, he's like, yeah, it's royalty or whatever. But I think because I associate the color purple with Neptune and Pisces because it corresponds with the third eye and the crown chakras. They're, you know, in the purplish hue color family. And so that's like divine spirituality, divine creativity. And that's what Neptune represents. They all go hand in hand together. And either he didn't completely have an awareness of it back when he started and everything is all about purple way back then, or maybe he did. But I think that's also why that's his color. I mean, look at all the Neptune and Pisces he has in his chart, you know, in 12th house. I mean, he's loaded with that energy. So he was so connected to the divine, even though it wasn't until later on where he like adopted like a religion to harness all of that spiritual energy and like make sense of it to him. You know, he's always been so connected to out there and to higher realms and a higher source of love and everything, you know, or to God or whatever. He's always been connected. And that's why I think the color purple is his favorite color, is what he, you know, puts out there to represent him. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
No, actually, I that's a great question and a great observation. I was watching an old interview with Oprah, excuse me, that he did. And he brought up that he was a Gemini. And I was like, oh my gosh, I knew he was Gemini. But what was interesting about it is he was talking about, you know, really realizing that he has like this other person inside. And he was very aware of this other person. And he says, well, I am a Gemini. You know, he was trying to explain it to Oprah. And she's going, what are you talking about? But he really knew about that duality. He said that when he was a young child, because he was kind of bullied for being small, that he could go to that other person to kind of protect himself. But, you know, when he made the shift, a lot of it had to do with legal reasons, from Prince to his symbol. The symbol is actually, when you put it together, of Venus and Mars.
Right,
so,
right.
The symbol. He definitely understood that. The other thing I think is so interesting is that, you know, with Venus and Taurus, you know, it is a beautiful blend of that feminine and masculine energy that knows how to harness itself together. You know, we even see, you know, like Cher. How many people want to become Cher and dress like Cher, because she is this amazing icon of expressing all parts of if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm kind of going off, but he had that ability too. And you know, Tauruses love makeup and extreme ways of expressing yourself. So he really had, I believe, a strong awareness. And I think a lot of people don't realize too, with the moon in Pisces, the ability to see into the future, and you may not even realize it till you get older, how many times you were able to project something into the future that didn't make sense at the time, but later makes sense. You know, a lot of his songs, I was listening to one of them today, you know, just even talking about, you know, that he hated elevators and, you know, don't let the elevator take you down. And I know that's kind of weird, but
yeah,
that, you know, it's hard to talk about, but, you know, we don't always know. And I think the moon in Pisces has a way, we have to be careful what we say, because, you know, it's very symbolic. We have an understanding of the future, but we don't always understand it at the time. that were having it. So I don't know. All that being,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
I mean,
I totally agree.
I know. Well, and we
Yeah.
look back at some of the legendary people that had the moon in Pisces. You know, even Robert Plant has the moon in Pisces. Boom, legendary. Obviously, Michael Jackson. Who was I thinking about today? I know Johnny Cash had a lot of Pisces in his chart. Elvis Presley, moon in
Elvis.
Pisces. And these are these not the legendary singers that we do not forget? They change our lives. So there's something very, very special about their ability to tap into the vibration. And when they can bring it out through music, you know, he had a very strict, you know, musical background. And I believe I heard he was, you know, raised as a Jehovah's Witness. So, you know, he did have a very strict religious upbringing as well. Although that might have expressed itself differently later. He was, you know, he tried to adhere to those principles.
Yeah, definitely. I'm not sure if his upbringing included Jehovah's Witness, because he's pretty private about his, you know, early life and everything. Even though there are some things that he has revealed. I know that he got into the Jehovah's Witness later on through a friend of his, Larry Graham, who's like a guitarist that, you know, was in his band or whatever, and became a good friend. But, you know, one thing that can show about his upbringing is the placement of Chiron, the asteroid of the wounded healer. It's showing in his third house, but it's the fourth sign from the ascendant, so it counts as also being the fourth house. So it does show that there were some wounds suffered there from his early family life. You know, his mom and dad fought. They split up when he was very young. So it was very tumultuous for him and torturous. And he even said that when they asked him, what part of Purple Rain do you feel is the most autobiographical, if that's a word, like it really does tell some truth about your life. And he said, the part where my mom's crying and I'm reaching out to her. And I was like, oh, you know, I felt bad, you know, because I could relate to that, and it is very sad. It touched him a lot. And then also, you know, he had the loss of 2 children, so that's another wounds that he suffered in the area of family, you know, and because of that, he and Maite divorced. It was just never the same after that. So he never got a chance to have a family of his own. That really hurts my feelings for him. But you know what? He got to, you know, have the world, his fans and everybody be his family. He really gave a lot of himself. Like, I never got to see a live show, you know, but from what I've heard is he gave so much of himself. He would do all these encores and come back on. Like, he gave and gave and gave. That's, I believe, his moon in Pisces in the 4th house. Like, we're all like his people, his family. He's just giving and giving and giving to us. And you know, but it is unfortunate that he suffered in the area of family, having one of his own that's fully functional and loving. But, you know, he was able to give to all of us instead. And I'm sure that did, you know, make his heart warm up with joy.
Oh, yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah. And I think, you know, I think that was really, like you said, really difficult for him. I saw a few interviews and, you know, just him wanting to have that, you know, abundance of children and all of those things. That was something that he really did want.
Yeah, and if you see that you saw that Oprah interview, that was done like right after his son passed away, but they had to play it off like, you know, that didn't happen. And he and Maite, they were still playful with each other. I mean, she's a Gemini moon and he's a Gemini sun and Mercury, so they could play it off. Oh yeah, how everything's great. But you know what? Knowing that fact and then watching that interview and looking in his eyes, I mean, especially as another water sign person who's intuitive, I could so see and feel his sadness. He was so trying so hard to like just get through that and still move on with life as a Gemini, keep it moving. But I know it was so hard for him. If you watch that interview, like just look at his eyes and you can see that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I definitely see that. I thought it was interesting too. Another, you know, when we talk about the different signs, you know, depending on, we can talk about the sun signs, but obviously we're going deeper into astrology when somebody has, you know, where is their moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars. We're looking at all these aspects. These show often themes that play out in all of our lives, but they all can play out a little bit differently. One of the themes that can play out with the moon in Pisces, because it represents the 12th house, it also represents mental institutions and prisons and all of those things, is that, and one of the interviews I'd heard today is that his family had several family members. I think he's of 7. But, you know, he had a sibling that suffered with mental problems, you know, often moon in Pisces, because it can draw that in, or family members or a mother. Often they really know that side of life, you know, they experience it through siblings or family members. And often, you know, it's a difficult path. But I thought it was interesting, you know, we didn't hear a lot about his siblings, but now they're coming out of the woodwork, because we have this, you know, this estate out there now with his 8th house in Gemini, which represents trusts and wills, Gemini being siblings. I thought that was kind of an interesting twist as well, as I'm looking at his chart.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, so lots to talk about with him. These are just a few things that, you know, I think we're seeing an extraordinary life. He had, you know, he lived life. He felt pain. He wrote about pain, but he also brought life. He brought amazing life, and his music is going to be, you know, I think even more powerful now. I think people will really, really go back now and go, oh my gosh, you know, I didn't realize how much he did. You know, I went back and listened to songs I hadn't even heard yet, and I was like, wow, you know.
Yeah, and then he has a because he was such a creator, and that's what he did on a daily basis. He just lived creativity and breathed it, you know. He has his vault that is like all the fans are like hearing about, and like, oh, you know, well, we've known about it for years, but now it's like we're hearing that the vault is being cracked open with all of his unreleased songs that he just stored in there. Some of them are even going back to the days of Purple Rain and working with The Time and Sheila E. He had some unreleased stuff in there. And then Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, before he passed away, what they say is he agreed to let them produce the unreleased vault tracks one day. So as of we're filming this, that's something that I'm excited about. I'm waiting for it. And I hope it's true. I hope it happens, because then we can really enjoy his music for like many more years to come, and he can really, like, you know, continue to live on. And I think maybe part of him being so intuitive, he kind of purposely did that, you know, but kind of unknowingly. I don't know what the word is right now, but kind of like how Tupac did. He had all this unreleased stuff. He just recorded and recorded and recorded, and now his albums can be put out continuously when he's been gone for years, and his mom, you know, his family can continue to profit off of that. So yeah, Prince is a very intuitive guy. He did the same thing. I can't wait to hear the unreleased vault tracks. I don't know about you guys.
Yeah. Well, I think like what you said at the beginning, he's timeless. He breaks all boundaries, and the future, you know, he you know, may not have known it, or he may have known it. I think he was a pretty smart guy, but he's definitely going to continue to project out into the future, which I think is so amazing. Well, this has been a great discussion. Do you have any final words you'd like to say about Prince tonight? I think this has been a great discussion. We're just topping the surface of this tonight, but we wanted to come out and just, you know, really pay our respects, you know.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, there's still so much to say, but I don't want to make this a 2-hour video and bore people.
We can do another hour, I'm sure.
This bores me. Let's play a game of basketball. I don't want to do that, but he was just, I don't know. I'm just at a loss for words of what else to say. Because there's so much, but it's still kind of hard to accept, I'm sure, for other fans as well. But you know, we'll eventually come to the realization that he really will continue to live on through like his music and everything he put out there. All his humanitarian efforts are coming out to the surface now, so people need to check into that and realize that he wasn't just an artist. He really was a true humanitarian who gave back to those in need, but he did it privately, and that is such a, you know, Pisces moon, Scorpio rising thing to do, to, you know, hidden humanitarian efforts, but just giving from the heart, you know, and that's what he did. And I hope we continue to hear more stories about his great efforts besides the music, and, you know, hear some more great unreleased tracks.
Yes, yes. No, that's an excellent point. And I think, you know, we saw that also with Robin Williams. You know, he was also a Scorpio rising with the moon in Pisces. And in the end, we found out about the things that he did. You know, he would go to these sets and, you know, there would be homeless people around and he would hire all of them to be on the set. That was his prerequisite to come and work, that he had to be able to hire people in need to come and benefit. And so the same with Prince. I mean, huge humanitarian efforts. Like you said, I don't think we've even begun to hear. And that is that hard. And I think that's why in the end, you know, he really didn't have all, you know, he didn't like contracts, you know, he really didn't have a will set in place. You know, he lived above the system. You know, he was also very with that, you know, Uranus and Leo there. It's like, you know, he was going to do it his way. Yeah, gosh, there's so much to say.
I agree.
I mean, we could just go in, but thank you so much for coming on tonight. I thought this was great. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And please, we would love to hear any of your thoughts. Please go over. I'm going to put a link below for April, Moon and Pisces Goddess, to go check her channel out. She's got some great videos. She has a great Moon and Pisces video too. I love that one. And, you know, we just want to come on and, you know, talk about these things and give you guys some things to talk about. And if you have any questions below, please feel free. We'd be happy to try to answer some questions if you do. And thank you all for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you, Chrystal. I really enjoyed this.
Oh, good. Well, thank you again so much. And we better stop or our Pisces moon energy will start rambling on. All right. Thanks again. Bye, you guys.